On March 4, 2000, Sony Computer Entertainment released the PlayStation 2 in Japan. 7 months later, on October 26, 2000, the console launched across North America at a retail price of $299. Over its official 13-year manufacturing lifecycle, the platform reached a lifetime sales milestone exceeding 160 million units worldwide, establishing itself as the best-selling home video game console in history. While its custom 64-bit Emotion Engine processor delivered significant computational capability for the era, the platform's unprecedented commercial dominance was heavily accelerated by a secondary hardware feature: out-of-the-box support for standalone DVD video playback. By integrating a consumer DVD player directly into a home gaming console at the turn of the millennium, Sony placed an affordable, standard-definition, DVD-based home entertainment hub into millions of living rooms. This dual functionality created a fundamental security dilemma. To protect its software ecosystem, Sony engineered a multi-layered security framework designed to detect, reject, and prevent the execution of unauthorized, duplicated, or homebrew software. Conversely, to fulfill its promise as a universal multimedia player, the console had to accept standard, mass-produced movie discs manufactured without proprietary gaming security structures. For 2 decades, much of the public PS2 security research focused on the game execution and authentication pathways. Engineers invested heavily in hardening bootloaders, securing peripheral storage buses, and enforcing physical disk authentication. Yet, in June 2020, security researchers CTurt demonstrated that the platform's ultimate vulnerability lay within its media playback infrastructure. By inserting a burned DVD-R containing crafted metadata into an unmodified, factory-sealed console, an attacker could bypass media verification checks and achieve arbitrary code execution. The strangest part about this breach is that the disk never cracked the PS2's physical game security at all. Crucially, this exploit did not defeat or spoof the physical authentication checks applied to game disks. Instead, it operated within an entirely separate, legitimate software pathway that the console opened specifically to process video media. To understand why the DVD video pathway represented an unmonitored attack vector, one must examine how the PlayStation 2 divides its internal processing duties. The console's architecture is split across 2 primary processing domains: the primary computing engine, powered by the 294.912 MHz Emotion Engine CPU, and the I/O processor, an R3000A derived subprocessor running at 33.8688 MHz that manages storage channels, controller ports, and peripheral communications. Directing the physical optical drive assembly is a specialized security microcontroller known as the MechaCon. Operating alongside dedicated radio frequency preamplifiers and digital signal processor drive electronics, the MechaCon controls tracking servos, spindle motor speeds, and physical disk authentication routines. Copy protection for factory-pressed PlayStation 2 game disks relies on physical manufacturing structures embedded within the disk substrate during industrial glass mastering. When a game disk is inserted into the drive, the optical pickup reads these specialized physical traits embedded alongside the data tracks. Consumer recordable media, such as DVD-R or CD-R disks written by consumer thermal lasers, cannot reproduce these factory-stamped physical structures. When an unmodified console ingests a burned copy of a game disk, the drive electronics detect the absence of these physical authentication markers. The system classifies the media as unauthorized for game execution, signals an authentication failure, and halts the boot sequence. Over the console's lifecycle, bypassing this physical barrier required specific intervention. Modchips were soldered directly onto the motherboard to intercept serial bus communications and forcibly inject fake authentication success signals into the MechaCon. Mechanical swap techniques used utilities like Swap Magic to boot an authentic disk, allow the MechaCon to validate physical markers, and mechanically force the drive tray open before alerting the system firmware before swapping in a burned disk. Storage exploits like FreeDVDBoot loaded executables directly from a memory card or internal hard drive disk. While FreeDVDBoot eliminated hardware soldering, installing it initially required a pre-modified console or a specific game-based memory card exploit to write the payload drivers onto the card. Commercial DVD video discs produced for the film industry contain no PlayStation game authentication structures. They are manufactured according to standard DVD forum specifications using ISO 13346 and universal disk format file systems. If the console enforced game disc authentication across every inserted disc, commercial movie playback would be impossible. To accommodate movie playback, system firmware implements a distinct handling routine for standard video media. The system recognizes valid DVD video media through the optical and file system structures expected by the DVD player, allowing the disc to enter the DVD video playback path rather than the game disc boot path. Once classified as DVD video, the optical drive adjusts its reading parameters and signals the operating system that valid media is present. The system BIOS then loads an embedded first-party media application from internal system storage, dvdplayer.elf. The system transfers dvdplayer.elf into main memory and hands execution control to it. From the system's perspective, dvdplayer.elf is a trusted binary compiled directly by Sony. It runs with high system privileges on the primary Emotion Engine CPU to handle complex media parsing, graphics rendering, user controls, and audio decoding. Because early multimedia files were viewed as passive data inputs rather than executable code vectors, the embedded player application processed incoming video navigation files without sandboxing or memory isolation. This design was consistent across every iteration of the PlayStation 2 hardware, extending even to rare commercial variations. A notable example is the Sony Bravia KDL220PX300, a 22-inch high-definition television released in late 2010 that built a complete PlayStation 2 motherboard directly into its base pedestal. Despite its non-traditional television form factor, the integrated PS2 retained a compatible DVD player attack surface, keeping the media parsing vulnerability active inside an integrated home appliance. Before discovering the DVD player vulnerability, CTurt investigated multiple avenues for achieving software-only code execution on unmodified consoles without requiring specialized hardware or pre-exploited memory cards. An early phase of this research focused on official homebrew utilities distributed during the console's commercial life. CTurt's earlier work targeted YADE, a basic interpreter included on demo discs bundled with early PAL region PlayStation 2 consoles. While YADE allowed users to execute custom code, relying on demo discs was geographically limited and required users to manually input code or load files through specific peripheral configurations. This led CTurt to ask a fundamental architectural question: is there an unsandboxed first-party application built into every PlayStation 2 console that automatically parses user-supplied data straight from an optical disc without requiring a commercial game disc? The answer was the system's embedded DVD player. Because the console automatically launches dvdplayer.elf whenever a video disc is inserted, an exploit embedded inside a DVD video structure would require no specific game disc, no memory card modifications, and no hardware alterations. The attack surface was present on every console shipped with a functional optical drive. A standard DVD video disc organizes its navigational controls, interactive menus, and playback parameters inside video title set information files, located in the video.ts directory. Files such as video.ts.ifo and vts_01_0.ifo contain configuration tables defining language settings, audio channels, aspect ratios, and button navigation commands. When a movie disc is loaded, dvdplayer.elf reads video.ts.ifo into RAM and parses its nested binary structures to prepare the user interface. Through static analysis and reverse engineering of various dvdplayer.elf binaries, CTurt audited the memory allocation and bounds checking logic applied to these configuration tables. Initial public speculation assumed that FreeDVDBoot relied on a standard stack buffer overflow, a primitive vulnerability where an oversized string overwrites adjacent stack memory, replacing a saved return address register on the MIPS stack frame so that a CPU instruction jumps straight to shellcode. The actual vulnerability discovered by CTurt was fundamentally different. It was an out-of-bounds indexing vulnerability caused by a large overflow from a statically allocated data buffer that corrupted an adjacent internal array index variable. When parsing malformed language and subtitle descriptor tables within a crafted IFO file, dvdplayer.elf reads user-defined length fields directly from the disk. The parsing routine failed to validate whether these incoming length parameters matched the fixed bounds of its allocated data buffer. As a result, supplying an oversized length field caused the parser to copy incoming disk data past the boundary of its statically allocated target buffer, overriding adjacent variables in memory, including an internal array index variable utilized in subsequent operations. Corrupting memory turned out to be the easy part. The real challenge was turning that corruption into predictable control of the processor. Memory corruption alone does not grant an attacker execution control. The critical hurdle is converting corrupted data into predictable instruction flow. In dvdplayer.elf, the array index variable corrupted during IFO parsing was subsequently used by the application to reference a table of function pointers. Under normal operation, the player reads an index value from the file, looks up the corresponding function pointer in a precompiled jump table, and calls that address to execute the appropriate handler. By supplying precise bytes in the malformed IFO file, CTurt prevented the index variable from being reinitialized and forced the application to set the array index to an out-of-bounds value. When dvdplayer.elf attempted to execute the corresponding function pointer, it calculated a memory address far outside the legitimate bounds of the jump table. This out-of-bounds lookup pointed directly into a region of RAM occupied by raw DVD file data that had been loaded into memory via direct memory access. Instead of calling a legitimate media handling function, the CPU branched straight to an address containing the attacker's Stage 1 payload. Contrary to early technical theories regarding direct memory access cache mismatches, instruction cache coherency turned out not to be a barrier during initial execution payload directs because the instruction cache was flushed during system startup and the payload did not overwrite previously executed code. The Stage 1 payload executed native kernel management calls, specifically utilizing exec PS2 to reinitialize kernel state and destroy interfering background threads. Once the execution environment was stabilized, the Stage 2 payload scanned the optical disk's file system for an unencrypted homebrew executable, such as the file manager ulaunch-elf, loaded it into memory, and executed it. If you enjoy deep dives into retro hardware security and silicon forensics, subscribe to the channel. And if you have tested FreeDVDBoot or MechaPwn yourself, share which PS2 model revision you ran it on in the comments below. It is vital to distinguish FreeDVDBoot from software piracy tools. FreeDVDBoot is a pure execution exploit that launches arbitrary homebrew applications like file managers, media players, and emulators on unmodified consoles without altering game authentication. Downstream utilities like ESR or Executar Software Reconfigured operate separately. ESR patches a backup game ISO so that its internal header mimics a DVD video disc. When ingested, the console launches the DVD player, FreeDVDBoot triggers, and the payload hands execution over to ESR, which then redirects disk reads to execute the patched game data. Deploying FreeDVDBoot across the PlayStation 2 hardware landscape revealed significant software fragmentation. Over its 13-year production life, Sony released dozens of motherboard revisions across major geographic regions: NTSC-J, NTSC-U, PAL, and NTSC-C. Alongside physical hardware updates, Sony routinely revised the embedded dvdplayer.elf application. Early systems used versions including 1.00, 1.01, and 2.10. Later Fat consoles introduced versions 3.00, 3.02, and 3.04, while Slim consoles featured versions 3.10 and 3.11. Crucially, early Japanese consoles, specifically the SCHPF10000 and SCHPF15000, stored their initial DVD player software on external memory cards rather than internal system ROM. This detail undermines the common narrative that all PS2 DVD players were immutably frozen in silicon. Early Japanese models possessed fully updatable software components loaded directly from removable storage. Because each player version was compiled independently, memory offsets for internal functions, buffers, and jump tables shifted between revisions. An exploit payload calculated for DVD player 3.10 would target an empty or invalid memory address on version 2.10 or 3.00, causing the console to crash instantly. To achieve broad usability across slim hardware, CTurt engineered a hybrid payload layout. By analyzing player versions 3.10 and 3.11, he identified that their respective IFO offsets did not overlap in memory. This non-overlapping layout allowed payload data structures for both versions to coexist safely in RAM within a single file structure, enabling a single burned ISO image to execute cleanly across almost all slim models globally. However, differences across earlier Fat console revisions running older player versions required distinct, version-specific ISO images tailored to their unique memory layouts. Executing homebrew via burned media introduced a secondary engineering challenge related to optical drive hardware maintenance, thermal stress on pickup focus and tracking coils. On specific hardware revisions, particularly late Fat units and early Slim units, drive tracking and focus operations are managed by specialized digital signal processing hardware, such as the Sony CXD3098Q chip. When reading low-quality, poorly burned, or physically degraded recordable media, the optical pickup experiences continuous, unrecoverable sector read errors. Under severe continuous read failures, specific DSP implementations can experience tracking loop lockups. If a lockup occurs, the drive circuitry may supply continuous, maximum direct current voltage to the optical pickup's focus and tracking coils. Because these microscopic copper coils are designed to operate under oscillating alternating current pulses, sustained maximum direct current causes rapid ohmic heating. This heat can melt coil insulation, short the windings, and permanently damage the drive assembly. This hardware failure is a physical consequence of optical drive wear and poor media readability. It is not a malicious instruction contained within FreeDVDBoot's IFO payload files. Using high-grade recordable media written at appropriate burn speeds serves as a practical operational safeguard to reduce the likelihood of read errors that contribute to the failure condition. To mitigate drive failure risks, hardware modders utilized physical modifications. Passive resistor modifications, such as someone's fix, solder resistors in line with the tracking and focus driver lines to reduce overall current flow, though technical documentation confirms they do not reliably prevent lockups under total signal loss. Active PIC-based protections, such as the matrix PIC fix, monitor communication between the DSP and MechaCon for the failure condition and automatically shut the console down when a crash is detected. FreeDVDBoot gave researchers control over software, but the next breakthrough went after the security chip deciding which physical disks the console trusted. FreeDVDBoot provided arbitrary software execution at the software layer, but did not alter lower-level hardware registers. In April 2021, developer AkuHawk released MechaPwn, a project demonstrating how software execution could be leveraged to permanently reconfigure internal hardware parameters. MechaPwn targets the MechaCon security microcontroller directly. Researchers discovered that the MechaCon firmware contains internal configuration routines accessible over the system bus when invoked by software running with kernel privileges. By executing the MechaPwn installer via an entry vector like FreeDVDBoot, the application communicates directly with the MechaCon, commanding it to unlock its persistent onboard EEPROM and NVPROM storage. Once unlocked, MechaPwn modifies internal configuration flags that dictate regional identity and disk authentication behavior.
Depending on the model and configuration, these modifications alter the MechaCon's media verification parameters across various FAT 70,000 series and Deckard revisions. Once patched, supported console configurations can boot out-of-region pressed retail game discs directly from the standard system menu or accept master disk media configurations. MechaPwn does not literally transform a commercial retail console into an official Sony development unit. Rather, it reconfigures internal flags within the MechaCon's existing parameter set to change how the hardware evaluates media checks. And the media player security story didn't end in 2021. Years later, researchers discovered that the media player still contained unmapped entry points.
The narrative surrounding PlayStation 2 software security often assumes that research concluded following FreeDVDBoot and MechaPwn. However, research into the DVD player attack surface continued to yield new breakthroughs. On December 17, 2025, security researchers publicly released YADE, or Yet Another DVD Exploit. While FreeDVDBoot provided robust coverage for slim consoles and specific late revision FAT models, earlier DVD player builds remained unpatched or poorly served by existing public exploit images. YADE targeted previously unmapped file parsing subroutines inside these earlier player builds. By crafting malformed program chain data within IFO structures, YADE triggered a buffer overflow that redirected execution to load custom ELF files. Subsequent project updates expanded software-only exploit coverage across a wide array of firmware families, including 3.00, 3.02, 3.03, and 3.04 variants across European, American, Japanese, and global FAT console revisions. The release and expansion of YADE demonstrated that even a quarter century after the PlayStation 2's commercial launch, the complex file parsing subroutines embedded within its media player still contained unmapped execution vectors. The subversion of the PlayStation 2 through its media player illustrates a fundamental principle in cybersecurity architecture. System security is non-composable. Combining a secure system component with an insecure system component does not produce a secure overall system. Sony's physical game disc authentication remained a significant obstacle to directly booting ordinary recordable game media. However, the commercial necessity of supporting standard DVD video movies forced the inclusion of a secondary parallel execution pathway that bypassed game disc authentication entirely. Because the embedded media player executed with elevated system privileges and processed complex user-supplied file structures without rigorous bounds checking, an out-of-bounds array index and an IFO parser was sufficient to achieve arbitrary code execution within the console's trusted software environment. Where system software is embedded permanently in read-only silicon, defects remain frozen in time, serving as a lasting case study in software forensics, hardware trust boundaries, and the enduring laws of physical media security.